Yeah.
The last one I want to talk about is Saquon Barkley, because Saquon Barkley was the second overall pick in the draft. We talk about this last time we talked about tight ends. When Barkley was drafted, he became a top 5 player at his position APY because of the way running back contracts have sort of declined as a fraction of the cap. And of course, the number 2 overall pick is still a pretty good contract. It's not as good as it was when, Ryan Leaf was the second overall pick or whatever, but it's still pretty good. Wins Rookie of the Year, is a fantastic football player. Spent a lot of time on injured reserve, spent a lot of time hurt, spent a lot of time on some bad teams. This past season, he got it all back, right? He looked every bit the player that they drafted at Penn State. The running back market this year is very heavy. We talk about Jacobs, we talk about Tony Pollard, we talk about Barkley. There's a lot of things working against Saquon Barkley here. If you're the Giants, he's kind of the heart and soul of your team. And you have the Daniel Jones aspect to it as well. Like, how much does that complicate it when he really has been the guy that's run through the tackles for you through thick and thin? And, all the pressures are to not pay him. But I don't know. It just seems like a really interesting question about what they do there.
Well, it's a hard decision because we know Daniel Jones needs a proper running back, legitimate running back, and he has one in Saquon. And yet we all like to think as evaluators, GMs in our personnel department, that we can find you someone, Joe Shane. We'll go out. He may not be as good as Saquon, but we can find someone who is functional enough, who would be a more sort of sound decision. And yet, again, at the very top of it, how important, and I know the head coach and the GM know how important it is to continue to bring that quarterback along with a legit running back. And if you claim that you can find the right one, that puts a lot of pressure on your department to pull that person out. But it's a big number. Have you mentioned what is the number on the running back this year?
I believe it's 12 million, which 12 to 15, I think. When you look at running back deals, there are sort of 2 tranches right now. It's, the Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, that's 16 million. By playing the Saints all those years, like Alvin Kamara, but how much does Alvin Kamara affect the team without Drew Brees? Like, it's a really, because he's a fabulous player, but the Saints haven't been much the last 2 years after the quarterback retired. Christian McCaffrey, similarly, like when he's amazing football. He went 1,000, right? Like, it's him, Marshall Faulk, and Roger Craig, the only guys that have done that. And Roger Craig and Marshall Faulk were Super Bowl winners, and Christian McCaffrey, because the league is the way it is now, wasn't. He goes to the Niners, and all of a sudden he's in the conference title game, and that game sucked, but he made the most impressive play in that game, that run he made for the only touchdown. And running back is so context dependent. This is why, analytics folks will say running backs don't matter. It's more that running backs eat from a table that requires a full kitchen staff to make. Right, that's essentially the hard problem. So if you're the Giants, you got Evan Neal, you got Andrew Thomas, 2 great tackles, you got a scheme that is very good for your running back, and a quarterback that does a good job because he's got some running ability to him. Linebackers have to hold serve, and that helps Barkley. You don't have great wide receivers. So what happens if teams decide this year, look, we're going to dare Daniel Jones to beat us through the air? The Vikings did that in the playoff game, and Daniel Jones beat him. Right. And so Barkley had some lanes. That's where I get worried, right? Because I think Barkley is firmly as talented as Kamara and as McCaffrey. Some teams have gotten away, like the Titans and the Browns, with paying their running back more in that, and the Vikings and the Bengals more in that $12 million range. I think if you're the Giants and you could say, look, you've had the injury history, let's give you a 12 million APY deal with a lot of guarantees up front. Guarantees that go above and beyond what the cap hit for the tag would be. I think Barkley would, if he's smart, agree to that. Like, if you gave him 30 million guaranteed, I think my analytics brethren would say, Eric, shut up. But I do think that would be the way to sort of bridge the gap between kind of the position being what it is, but what he represents to the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit PTSD on the running back signing. I mean, with Devontae Freeman. Look, I thought D. Freeman was a really, really good back for us. When you know, and you guys, we've talked about that. You remember it was midweek and he was talking about his contract in the bus. I remember just losing my mind. We've already talked about that. If anyone's listened to that one before, that pod, but I remember just being stung after that with running backs because he was never the same running back after we signed him, which again, I know that seems simple to everyone, but it's always on your mind as a GM. Like that feeling, it's one of the worst feelings we have. How did I not see that? Or were there elements that I did see and I gambled and it didn't work, or it did work, right?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately like there are rules in, like, I think we just have to accept variance, right? Like we know that running backs, generally speaking, don't provide good return on second contracts, and there are always going to be running backs who do. Like Derrick Henry's been wonderful, right?
Sure.
Since Nick Chubb is terrific as well. Kamara has had his days. Austin Eckler. Like the interesting part was the running, the player that I kind of compared their player to Austin Eckler, and I was like, look, Austin Eckler's a fantastic running back. He's better than your guy, and he's going to make $7.5 million. And so, like, that's where my comp is. And Austin Eckler has provided fantastic return for the Chargers on a very modest deal. Now, your draft status trails with you, right? If you're the second overall pick, you're gonna expect more on your second deal than an undrafted guy out of Northern Colorado. So that is a deal, but like, I think it's just accepting variance, right? It's sort of like if you have a quarterback who's not elite, don't pay him the top end deal. Now, there's going to be a guy like Stafford who wins a Super Bowl, and you're just going to have to write that off and say, sometimes you get different cards than you expect. But if you take all time, we'll talk about Derek Carr at the very end, but if you pay the Derek Carrs, you pay the Ryan Tannehills, you pay the Kirk Cousins, you should expect not to win, right? Will there be a team that does it and wins? Yes. Same thing with running back. I feel like if you pay a running back a second contract, there's a good chance it's not going to work out. Now, will there be guys that work out? And are there other reasons to do so? And I think in the case of Barkley, you really have to look at your locker room and say, look, this is the guy we drafted high. He's played really well. The only thing that's gotten in his way are injuries. Do we really want to set a precedent and say, look, that's not enough to play for the Giants after your first contract? That's a hard thing to look at the other 52 guys and say.
So if you're in this situation right now, Mr. GM, and I said as a Giants about, who would you invest? I know it's simple beyond, like, of course you want to go with the quarterback, but who are you more comfortable with right now?
I would either tag Barkley or sign Barkley to a deal like Nick Chubb, like Derrick Henry, and I would let Daniel Jones go. And I think the precedent here is, and you had Dable in I believe Dable wasn't quite in Buffalo at the time, but you had Tyrod Taylor took the Bills to the playoffs in 2017 when, Brandon Beane and one of the best coaches in the NFL, Sean McDermott, were rebuilding. They traded Sammy Watkins and Ronald Darby in the same week in training camp. They were not trying to win, and they went 9-7. And Tyrod Taylor played pretty good football, like very similar to Daniel Jones. And they're so like, look, are we really going to get to the promised land with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback? No. Okay, well, we're going to draft Josh Allen and kind of take a dip for a year, and then now they are what they are. I think I would keep Barkley, and I would let Daniel Jones go.
And what would you do at the quarterback position? And where are you picking in the draft? 20 what?
I think they're in they're 25th, 26th, something like that. I mean, Tyrod, I would probably think about a Tyrod Taylor, Jacoby Brissett, Jameis Winston type player, and just have that be the bridge.
That is such a wah moment. That's what I'm feeling. I'm putting my Joe Shane hat on. I'm like, holy shit.
But you look at Buffalo though. Buffalo they went 9 and they were picking. I can't remember where they traded, but in that draft they traded Cordy Glenn to Cincinnati, if I'm not mistaken, to move up. And they packaged those picks to go up and get Allen. Like, I think Anthony Richardson would be the guy I would draft kind of mid first round, and I'd use my picks to move up because, I just think that would be what I do. And like that would be how you would get the fan base riled up. Now I understand the fan base being angry with that because it's like, you just drafted a guy 6th overall and he sucked for 3 years and then was good. And now you're telling us to get back on this train again. Bleep you. Like, I get it. But I also have seen, like, look, the NFL, the train tracks of the NFL are filled with corpses of the Vikings with Cousins, the Raiders with Carr, I mean, even like even the Colts with Matt Ryan, the Colts with Carson Wentz, all the mid-tier quarterbacks don't get you to the promised land. They just they get you in a comfortable place. But that's more want to me, is like going 7-10 and 8-9 and like for an extended period of time. And I know for a franchise that's been bad for a few years in a row, I get where you'd rather be in competitive games in January than not. But those fan bases, as you know, they're never going to be satisfied with mediocre. Once you get to mediocre, they're going to be like, well, why aren't we winning Super Bowls? So
my thought on that, it's interesting you say that, because I keep putting myself in that spot, and I'm thinking, all right, we're not really sure that he's middling, right? I mean, we're not. We're thinking that, okay, could he be good? I'm always a believer. Could he be a top 12 quarterback? We don't know that. Where is he? 15? Is he midline?
But like Kirk Cousins is a top 10 quarterback, and
what's surprising to me, exactly, which I don't
like. Well, because one of the things that's interesting is like the league has lost. So in a weird way, and I had a friend, Justice Mosqueda, talk to me about this, and he's very intelligent. I took, and when we were talking about the Dak contract, he's like, Eric, when Drew Brees and all these guys retire, Dak is going to be like a top 6 quarterback in the NFL. Like, you forget this. And I think he's right, but he's wrong, because with all of these great quarterbacks retiring, the rookie contract actually means more, because if you have a great defense, you can kick the hell out of these teams that have Dax and have Cousins. And like when the league was full of great quarterbacks, you couldn't win with defense. And so, you had to have the elite guy as you guys had with Matt, like you had to have the elite guy to compete. But now that there's only like 4 or 5 elite guys and they're all in one conference, you can make the Super Bowl having a wagon of a defense like the Eagles, and having a guy like Cousins and having a guy like Carr, and like that prevents you from having a fighting chance on that side of the ball. And that's kind of where I get a little nervous about paying a mid-tier guy, I guess.
So Joe, Shane, and Brian Daboll, of course. Daboll was coach of the year, right? Did some really, really good things. And they were coming in last year with not a whole bunch of pressure on them, right? Mm-mm. The world was theirs. This is the start of some really, really tough decisions for them over the years. And this, quite honestly, is where Joe Shane truly starts to get judged. I'm a huge believer in GMs are judged by their big moves. I know I've probably said that before. Yeah, people like to say, oh, that 5th rounder worked or the free agent worked. That's great. There's no pressure in those moves at all. Mm-hmm. I'm talking the big moves. This is a big move. It wasn't. He didn't draft him, of course, nor did Brian. But here they are in a really interesting crossroads spot. You're making the GM move. You move on from that quarterback. I have to say that I'd stay with the quarterback and ride the idea that we're going to get what we can get out of him. He's growing. He's maturing. I'm going to stay there. It's going to be expensive for us. I'm more apt to think, hey, running back, Saquon, look, I love what you did, but there's some other guys out there. That's probably the difference between us, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think the only thing that I would caution against, and this is something we have learned over the past few years, is you want to make that contract. You want to make that contract long then. Like if you commit to Daniel Jones, commit to him for 5 years. And, and they have, I think something like 40, I can't remember, it's like 40, I can't remember his effective cap space or whatever, but like they have enough money to front load Daniel Jones's contract and then, maybe take their lumps this year because the rest of the roster isn't complete. But then, as a fraction of the cap, like the tricky part of the quarterback deals too, is that they grow at anywhere from 12 to 15%, 10 to 15% a year, while the cap grows at about 8% a year. So every dollar you pound into one of those like elite quarterback deals, you get like the cap grows, but not as fast as those deals grow. So what you need to do, and this is where the Vikings erred with signing Cousins, because Cousins was on those 3-year deals. And you're like, oh, if he stinks, and we talked about this with Jack in a text today, the risk is 2 ways. The one risk is if he stinks, right? Obviously, then you just wasted those years. The other risk is if he's just good enough to earn a second contract, because he's going to turn around not in 3 years, in 2 years, and go for that top of the market deal again. And then you're right back to the issue. So if you go with Daniel Jones, it's ironic to say this because I'm the guy saying don't sign him at all. But if you sign him, you want to sign him to a 5-year deal so that by the end of the deal, he's making decent, like low money relative to the cap growth. And then you can probably win. And that's what happened in Vegas with Derek Carr. And that's what's never been able to happen with like a guy like Cousins. And it happened with Jimmy G in San Francisco. By the time Jimmy G's contract was in the final years, he was fine. Like his money was okay. It's just it's the early years where it really gets you. And that's if you can front load the deal. And that's my amended suggestion.
That's great. And the grounding factor back to the personality and the character and the leadership. And can he truly win, when it's all hanging out? I mean, I don't know if you have that judgment of him as a football fan right now. You better believe his head coach and his GM have a really good feel if they're going to make that decision, right? Because that is probably my caveat. If there's any indication like, man, we were holding on to our ass the whole season, God bless him, he pulled us through. Of course, you're not signing him.